I always knew that I was undocumented, but I think as you grow up, you start realizing the challenges that you're going to face as an undocumented adult.
Welcome to Insider Career Conversations, a podcast that highlights unique careers and non-traditional education paths. I'm your host, Sylvia Juarez, an education consultant and first-generation advocate. This season's conversations touch on immigrant community advocate roles and how at times they require a specific type of community engagement. Each episode features guests well-versed in their field. We discuss their personal and professional journeys. My co-host this season is Yari Ortiz. She is someone I admire and have worked with for years to support undocumented students. In the past, we have focused on higher education, which evolved into recognizing the informal information and career advice students need to be successful in college and beyond. Now, we've reconnected and we're bringing those conversations with new perspectives. Let's get into it. Hi, Yadi. How are you doing today?
Hi, Sylvia. I'm doing really well. I'm excited to have this conversation today, and I'm excited to meet our interviewee today and our community partner. I am going to be hopefully learning a lot about them and the work that they're doing because I feel that it's really similar. The missions are very similar to the work that Pre-Held Dreamers does in working with the immigrant and undocumented community. However, I also feel that they're tackling a lot of issues and facing a lot of issues from a very different angle. And I think they're all very important, how we're all working with a community, because that's something that we are very excited about here at Pre-Held Dreamers, really working to advocate for favorable housing, education, health, and other immigration policies that affect the undocumented communities.
I think it's fabulous when we're talking about collective power because I think that's at some point, at least as long as I've been in education, collective power hasn't necessarily gelled as well. So I'm also interested in learning what the Resurrection Project is doing with that. I want to introduce Eréndira Rendón, Vice President of Immigrant Justice, and just begin the conversation because I'm super excited to hear about some of the resources, but I'm also interested to hear in some of the things that are happening that as a community, we need to be aware of and understand so that we can help support. So welcome, Ere. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you so much for having me. As a podcast junkie, I'm very excited to be in conversation with you too. So my name's Ere. I'm the Vice President of Immigrant Justice at the Resurrection Project. I myself am an immigrant. I came to the U.S. when I was 4 to be reunited with my dad. I'm still undocumented. I have DACA, so I'm protected from deportation and able to work. And I've been, doing this work because of that. I grew up in a small town by Wisconsin and graduated from high school in 2004, which was actually the year after in-state tuition passed in Illinois. And so I was able to realize that I could go to school. My town is about 9,000 people where I grew up, so it wasn't necessarily a normal thing to talk about your immigration status. But once I told my guidance counselor, her and I kind of figured out a way for me to be able to do that. I went to U of I in Champaign, and while I was there, at the beginning, I didn't know if I could tell folks if I was undocumented, and eventually once I realized that I could and started to share my story more and more with more students as well as with faculty or with advocates, I realized that it sucks a lot to be undocumented, but I realized that it's much worse to be undocumented and alone. And so that's why I started doing this work. After graduating from college, I moved to Chicago and was able to start doing some electoral organizing and organizing around expanding educational opportunities for students in the northwest side of Chicago. And now have been at the Resurrection Project for 12 years, where I was able to start our Immigrant Justice Department and have been able to grow it in a way that is centered in organizing, centered in our building that collective power and allowing folks like me to be able to use this work to continuously liberate ourselves.
Thank you so much, Ede, for what you've done, especially for what you've had to go through to get your education. I know that having been in higher education for some decades now, the biggest struggle has been to really give access to students that are undocumented and fighting for the in-state tuition, the financial aid, the advising, everything that comes along with supporting students at all capacities, and not just the students, but their families. So tell us a little bit about the impact that it had for your family, for you to pursue higher education.
I think growing up when you're little and you're undocumented, I always knew that I was undocumented. But I think as you grow up, you start realizing the challenges that you're going to face as an undocumented person, as an undocumented adult. And I think going to college is sort of that first, maybe not being able to get your driver's license was probably my first moment of realization of the impact. And then moving on, realizing how difficult it was going to be for me to go to college. I have a mom who's a hustler and has figured out a way to always be able to provide for my brothers and myself. She paid for all 4 years of school for me to be able to go, which I know is a huge challenge for a lot of folks, and especially for people like my parents who, we didn't qualify for any loans, we didn't qualify for any kind of assistance. I did manage to get quite a few scholarships. What is instilled in us is our ability to, our drive, right? Resilience to move forward regardless, and to not, at the moment, I didn't know what I was going to do with a college degree without a social security number. But my parents didn't know what they were going to do when they immigrated to the US. So there's a whole lot of those values and a lot of that I think my parents instilled in me to be able to do. And they continue to sacrifice their own well-being to make sure that I could go to school. But, that's why they came. And I think that they talk a lot about that with me as still to this day.
And as a person in the movement, Ere, I know like for a lot of folks it's very difficult. I myself am an ally. I'm not undocumented. My parents were immigrants and undocumented for a portion of their lives. So I have that privilege of being born here. And so I just want to pick your brain a little bit in regards to this collective power. And I know at Pre-Health Dreamers, we really work with our students a lot in becoming advocates, one as students, and then being advocates once they become health professionals. How do you feel about like just a lot of these conversations when we're working with the immigrant community in building community and being in these spaces together? And how do you feel about folks who are being affected also being in the front lines of a lot of this advocacy? Do you see that kind of being what drives your work? How does individuals juggle all of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very clear that all of the issues that we're ever going to win are never going to be done in isolation of each other. We absolutely need allies. We absolutely need folks who are undocumented to create a narrative and to share our stories. I think the reason why we won, for instance, 12 years ago, driver's licenses for undocumented in Illinois was because undocumented immigrants were saying, we're here, we're driving, we want to be able to take a test and have insurance and as much as possible do what we're supposed to do. It also took a lot of allies in being able to lift up the narrative. We actually were part of it was called at the time the Highway Safety Coalition. So it had nothing, the title didn't even say immigrants on it as a campaign, because we knew it couldn't only be undocumented, but it always takes both. It always takes fearless undocumented folks saying their stories, sharing their stories, creating the narrative. And it takes all of the institutions that we're part of, whether it be churches or nonprofits or colleges or health institutions, really leveraging the power that they have to be able to win any kind of tangible changes for the immigrant community.
I think you're touching on something that's really important, Ere, that it does take a group and everybody kind of taking their part in it. But I guess my question to you then comes from, what is it that you find, because we have listeners that may be undocumented or that want to be allies, what is it that you find when you talk about hustle, resilience? Is it focus? Is it discipline? What is it that you think really helps that someone can see that within themselves to be able to move forward, whether they're undocumented or they're an immigrant or a child of immigrant families? What is it that is there that you see most in your field or what you're doing now?
I think for me, I realized that if I wasn't doing something to change the trajectory of what was possible for myself and for my family, then I would just be in a very bad state of, probably depression, but just like not feeling like I was motivated. And so a lot of it came from that, is like myself wanting to change what is possible for my family and for myself. And then I got, it was able to build relationships across the city and across the state. And now I've realized that, this is my purpose. So my mom has her purpose, and her purpose was to come to the US and have her children be able to grow up with their dad and do as much as possible for her children. And I've realized that my purpose is to try to make the lives of my family and the lives of all immigrants, and particularly undocumented immigrants in Illinois, a little bit better. So that's sort of where my drive comes from. And it takes a lot of sheer getting up every morning and thinking that today may be a little bit better and we may take a couple steps backwards today. But generally, the fact that in Illinois we have driver's licenses, we became the first state in the country to give undocumented adults health care. We have free legal services for our communities. So also being able to see small, maybe these aren't that small, but being able to see victories is also very important to keep going.
Purpose with accomplishments. We're not the end, because we still have a lot more to do. But with your purpose, you see that goals are being met, at least in the short term and hopefully in the long term as well. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing with the Resurrection Project?
Yeah, so at the Resurrection Project, our mission is to build healthy communities. We are in Chicago, in the southwest side, in a very Mexican neighborhood. And the organization was started with organizing principles and really was working on making sure that communities were safer. When I started at the organization 12 years ago, and one of the things that I noticed, and obviously because of my own background, was that almost all of our clients were immigrants, right, and continue to be so. So TRP does three things. One is it is a developer. So we're a nonprofit developer. We operate about 700 affordable apartments in Pilsen Little Village and Back of the Yards. We also do a lot of work on financial education and financial wellness to help folks learn about credit, establish credit, and become homeowners. We want to have intergenerational wealth. And most of the folks that we help are immigrants, and actually about 30% of them are undocumented immigrants. And we make sure that we have partnerships with Second Federal Credit Union, for instance, which over 90% of their mortgages are for ITIN holders. And so creating that opportunity, including for undocumented folks, is important. And then about 8 or 9 years ago, I started the Immigrant Justice Department. We have a legal clinic. So folks come in and are able to get free representation in their immigration cases, whether it be deportation, U visas, VAWAs, DACA renewals, everything like that, asylum. We have a partnerships program. So we are the lead agency for our state program, which provides funds to organizations to be able to give free legal services. And so we administer that through our immigrant justice partnerships work. And then we have immigrant justice leadership and organizing. And so we train primarily undocumented women to be our base, to go out into the community, to go and give information about immigrant rights, but then also to expand those rights and pass laws and policies at the state and city level that are going to impact the lives of immigrants.
And it's so amazing. Like, I think for me that the work that you're doing also like with financial institutions, I had never heard of this area of how like financial institutions are helping individuals or organizations like yourselves create these housing facilities or create these loans for undocumented immigrants. And I think that is a conversation we're even having at Pre-Health Dreamers. For you guys, it's when it comes to housing. For us, it's when it comes to loans for undocumented students pursuing professional programs such as medicine, any type of higher professional program, because tuition is really high. And a lot of institutions don't provide that financial support. And, what have you found to be the conversations like with institutions that can help create these loans? I don't know if there's anything that you've learned and just how the conversations have gone. And I see that as really successful for you guys to be able to create that partnership that provides loans for folks to be able to find housing. What have those conversations been like? Because I feel like a lot of institutions still have a long ways to go in creating these partnerships with financial institutions to open up these opportunities for folks to be able to apply.
Yeah. Well, nationally, about 30% of all undocumented folks are homeowners. My mom bought her house in 1993. 3 years after we arrived, and immigrants have historically just have found ways to do so, right? Whether it's, your brother who's a U.S. citizen or your cousin who's a U.S. citizen takes out the mortgage for you and then you pay it back, which is the way that my mom was able to purchase her home. But we've always found ways to be able to work. We've always found ways to be able to be included and to be able to, get out loans and get out your bank account and all of that. And there's been a lot more work from even major institutions, right, that allow folks with ITIN numbers to get bank accounts, and whether it be savings or checkings and credit cards and things like that. Most of them stop at mortgages. But there's no data that shows that undocumented folks have a higher delinquency rate. If anything, all the data shows that undocumented folks are more likely to be able to pay their mortgages. And so where there's a will, there's a way. And we have found that there's a much bigger will within credit unions than there are with the large institutions. But that's sort of where we have made more movement locally. And I think that, generally, if you look across the country, credit unions and even smaller mortgage loan companies are much more willing to loan to undocumented folks, or folks regardless of their immigration status. We even saw the current administration now change some regulations, which now allows documented folks to take out, what's it called, those loans that are backed by the federal government. I'm like blanking on the name right now, but that's newer. It used to be that undocumented folks with DACA were not able to get those loans, and now we can. So there's nothing restricting these large institutions from giving loans to undocumented people, but we need to continue to pressure. And then in the meantime, knowing that sometimes actually credit unions are better alternatives for our community anyways. And so working with them is really important to make sure that folks know about these mortgage opportunities.
I love that you're bringing all of this up, because I think for us, that has been one of the main goals, to just spark these conversations. Sometimes even working like with educators and administrators in education, they don't realize that they can have these conversations with lending companies, right? Like they don't realize that they can create these processes and implement financial aid. And just like you were saying, Ere, like, I think that's one of the things that we've had to explain over and over. And you said it beautifully, right? That undocumented folks have been taking out loans, for homes, for vehicles, and more folks are doing it, or like more credit union or more credit cards are doing it now. We see a huge gap of it though with loans for professional programs. And I just think it's really interesting how, we hear in these conversations like undocumented folks are not going to be able to pay it back. And I love that you bring up the fact that undocumented folks have been paying back their loans for mortgages. And I hope that institutions of higher education are hearing this and learning and saying, this is a great investment and we will get this money back.
I really appreciate also, as I'm hearing you say all of these, you're touching on all these different branches, because my background is education. That's what I currently do. And I'm always fascinated in wanting to give examples to students. What was your undergraduate degree? Did you study economy? Did you study policy? What did you study, Ere?
I went in as a psych major. I ended up with social psych as my majors.
And I think that part of this podcast purpose is to show that you can study one thing and turn it into something completely different. And you're turning it into what policy, economics, to some degree, you're even doing some data science. So when you were younger, when you were in high school, did you have this advocacy voice? Did you know you were going to be advocating to this capacity?
Oh, absolutely not. I had no idea that this was a career. I had no idea that people had to advocate to create change. I was in college, and we had these groups come down to U of I, if you're familiar with Illinois geography. Chicago is sort of the center of all Illinois, except not actually physically, just like everything in terms of organizations and politics. But the U of I is in central Illinois, and one of the things we did was we had an organization called the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant Refugee Rights, as well as a Resurrection Project and a couple other orgs. They sent students who had been advocating for in-state tuition to speak about what is it that it took to get in-state tuition to pass and why they were involved. And it was the first moment that I realized that, it takes people to change the law. And it made me realize that I wanted to also do that as well. So Yeah, in high school, I had no idea. In college, I started kind of tinkering with it. And I think, to be honest, part of the reason why I ended up in this work is because I didn't have any other options, right? I graduated in 2008 from college, and where else was I going to work? I didn't have a social security number. I needed to kind of figure out a way that I was going to be able to make a living. And it was the nonprofits that were going to venture out and figure out a way to pay me. I was working as a consultant the first few years without a social security number. And then it just became a career, and it became my passion. And as I mentioned, right, my purpose.
I think you're a role model to those that may be in your situation, but also beyond, because I know that I talk to a lot of students that come from immigrant communities or immigrant background or first generation, and they feel like they have to have a purpose the minute they step into a college campus, and then a completion of that idea once they finish with a degree, because there's so much expectation from the families that they have to go into a certain field or they have to be a certain type of success. I feel you're successful in a variety of ways, and you're providing that opportunity for others to have the same time different type of success, or a success in their own version of it. So I can appreciate that. I do have a question when it comes to the organization. I'm assuming it's apolitical, correct?
Right. We're a nonprofit, which means we don't back any candidates or anything like that, but we do back issues and we elevate issues.
Can you talk to us a little bit about when you're working with such a heated and charged environment, how do you keep your sense of self and the opportunity to be able to work with others in a way that you're still kind of taking care of yourself, but having that empathy for those individuals that you might be supporting?
Yeah, I think it's really important that organizations stay connected to community. So the way that we do our work is we have a strong base, which means we connect every single day with undocumented folks. Our biggest focus is undocumented women. When we think about programs, because we're nonprofits, so we also run programs, we build our programs starting from that. So our legal services, for instance, we didn't start by all of a sudden giving legal services. We started by training women on their rights, and we did train the trainers, and then they went out and gave information to their community about their rights. They gave information to their community about how to apply for DACA, right? Because that was a new thing when we started. And they would then come back and we would talk about, what did you hear? What were the questions? We invested in them. We pay many of them stipends for the service aspect that they give to the community, and through the organization, we pay them stipends. Then from there, we built our legal clinic. And so the legal clinic is really a result of the hundreds of undocumented women who were telling us, okay, you give us this information and then you tell us to send them to another legal clinic. There's no cupo. There is a waiting list. And so we have to build our own, right? So that's how we started. When we do our work around education, we train women to be inside of the classrooms at their child's school. Women who may not speak any English and maybe didn't even go to beyond sixth grade, which is common for many of our immigrants, and they're empowered to be able to be of assistance and help inside of the classes. So I think that that's really important, is to make sure that we don't just become an advocacy organization or an organization that has leaders going out and speaking about the needs, but to stay connected in a very profound and deliberate way. We should build our programs, we should build our advocacy and our organizing in a way that is centered and that uplifts the folks that we're saying that whose lives we want to impact.
So, based on that, I also know that as someone who is documented, there's maybe an impression that you may have some limitations. And it sounds like everything you've talked to us about, you've really worked to break that down, including travel, because I know that you've had some opportunities to do some amazing travel. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because it seems like a fun side of you. I know you're all business, but is there a part of you that gets to do something that you feel kind of gives you that re-energizing of what your professional commitment may be very strict and very hard to kind of manage sometimes? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but how do you offset that? Is it with travel?
Yeah, so I'm a hiker and I live in the second flattest state of Illinois. So I have to, second flattest state of the US, which is Illinois. So I do have to travel quite a bit to be able to get out there and hike. So that's my go-to activity. But I've been able to apply for advanced parole and I've been able to go to several countries through that. And just most recently was able to go home again to Oaxaca and then got to see some other parts of Mexico for the first time. So it's really important for us to take care of ourselves. I think that was a question you asked earlier and I didn't even get to it. To think about, how do we keep going isn't just, those victories that I talked about, but it's also just joy. And then I also, I have my family lives about an hour and a half away where I grew up and I'm able to see them. I just got back this weekend from seeing them. And it's really important to continue to live. For me, it's important for me to live about an hour away so that I can still go and see them and spend as much time with them as possible. And it's really important to be out in nature and to be able to get to the mountains and hike as much as possible.
I really want to just go back a little bit when it comes to the advocacy. And it's, you're doing a lot of advocacy. And I know a lot of individuals, a lot of youth don't see themselves going into advocacy. Like they don't understand that it exists. And I know public policy is a degree that a lot more folks are pursuing now, a master's in public policy or public health. And I think that's where they're learning a lot more about changing the system from within and from an outside angle. I want to thank you for also just bringing all of that up and how, because I think I can really correlate with that. I didn't realize I was going to be an advocate. That's not something that you're taught, but I'm hoping that we start teaching that a lot more to a lot of youth. Like you can be an advocate in so many different ways with the different degrees that you're seeking and that you're pursuing. I wish higher education actually had a degree in advocacy. Like you can be an advocate BA or an advocate MA, to me that would be just so amazing just to learn a lot of these skills, because it does actually take a lot of skills to do the work that you're doing, Ede, with the community.
And Ede, I think we should have a degree in purpose and empowerment, because I think what you're doing and what your project is doing is phenomenal, with not only saying we have a purpose and this is how we're going to support it and how we're going to train you, but the empowerment of having the community own it on their own and having that move forward is something that really speaks to me, not only as someone that's out there working to try and change some of the status quo, but as a parent. I think it's also important that my sons know that there is a purpose for them, regardless of whether it pertains to them or not, that they do have something that they owe their community to a certain extent, but also more important, that they support individuals being empowered so that we can all move progressively together. And it seems like you're the embodiment of that. And I really appreciate what you have done and are doing at the national level, at the regional level, and even just as I reiterate, as a role model. So I really thank you for your time today.
Thanks to you both. And I'll just conclude. I don't think I'm supposed to conclude, but I'm going to conclude by saying I think it's great to study whatever it is you're passionate about. It's really a moment to learn when you're in college, and then get internships and know that being an attorney is not the only way to change law. This is a really great way to change our laws and to change our policies, is to get involved with an immigrant justice organization in your area.
Well, ladies, thank you so much. And we appreciate you listening and look forward to the next time. That's it for Season 3 of Insider Career Conversations. Thank you for joining us on this journey into immigrant community advocacy. Stay tuned for Season 4, where another amazing host and I will cover a new career field.
Insider Career Conversations is a production of Juarez Consulting. For more information, you can visit juarezconsultinginc.com. This episode was produced by Sylvia Juarez Magaña, with production help and editing by Kazmira Hall.